Game 9 of the final of the Women's World Chess Championship. Going into this game, scores level. It was a very exciting weekend. 2 excellent games, and thank you to Robert Rees for covering for me while I was away. So, scores level, Game 9, Lei Tingjie, the challenger, had white. Now, what would happen? E4, well, so far we've seen Caracan. We've seen E5 and some Spanish and a gioco piano. Today, Wenjun played the Sicilian, and it was a 4 knights variation. Now, this is an invitation for white to play knight b5, and that could head into a Sveshnikov after d6 and bishop g5. But instead of that, Lei plays knight takes c6, and this is a really contentious variation. Can lead to some absolutely wild positions, and theory hasn't quite crystallized on the best way for either side to play. Actually, there's still a lot of unknown territory here, so it's certainly a very interesting line to play. The most popular move is queen c7 here, but Wenjun went for bishop b7. But there have been some strong players that have played this, so it's not out of the ordinary. And after bishop e2, c5, it's a very finely balanced position. If one side somehow manages to get control here, if white manages to get control over the center and holds that pawn on e5, then that could be a beautiful spearhead for attacking on the king side. You can see black's counterplay comes here from this wonderful diagonal. Now here, Lei Tingjie played a new move. She has come to this match very well prepared. The normal move here is to castle kingside. And after queen c7, that's a clever move. So that attacks the pawn. And sometimes you can play c4 to stop white driving black's knight away. And then this is a popular continuation. Check. Now, don't take that one because c4 wins the knight. But queen c6. That's a lovely battery. And if bishop f3, which seems like the most natural move to oppose the queen here, then c4, we can see what black is up to. So once c4 comes, obviously physically prevents white from playing c4. So that secures the knight in the middle of the board. And that position should be okay for black. What about c4 straight away? Well, that's not good, because knight c3, threatening a mate, threatening a queen. Now, well, white can bail out into a poor endgame with bishop f3, but that is definitely better for black. White's structure isn't very good. So the most popular move here is f3. I'm going into a little bit of detail here because actually it has some bearing on the game continuation. And after this, then c4 is possible. Again, this idea to stop white from playing c4. And then this is a very sharp position, level material. But yeah, interesting pawn structure, it's quite dynamic. And there's another move here, which is e5, and that has been played quite successfully. Of course, computers have had their say in this position, and black is basically all right here. Point of e5 is that after c4, that knight finds a good square on f4. Right, so that's castles and queen c7. That's kind of the normal continuation. But Lei played a3. So it's so interesting. She's coming up with most of the opening surprises in this match. So what on earth is this move about? It's never been seen before. Well, here I should say Wenjun played rook c8, but I want to show you what happens if queen c7, which is, the same move as in the previous variation, should be good. Attacks the pawn, with these same ideas. So why wasn't this played? Well, watch what happens. Knight d6 check. That gets taken. We know that queen takes pawn loses a piece, so queen c6. Now what's the difference? The difference is white hasn't castled. This pawn is on a3. So c4 is actually a very good move here. There's no good discovered check. Well, in the other position with the king on g1, knight c3 was a good move, but that simply doesn't work here because white is just a piece up. So after c4, that knight has to retreat. Then this can be blocked, f3. And this is more pleasant for white, having pushed that knight back and secured that d pawn as well. So white is just going to castle kingside. That bishop is blocked out. And, bishop e3, queen d2, rook in the middle to secure the d pawn. It's a bit annoying that for black, that pawn is sort of permanently under fire. And that's definitely better for white. So that is one of the clever ideas behind a3. It's kind of a waiting move. White hasn't castled yet. And it also takes away the b4 square from the knight. So Wenjun kind of responded also with a sort of a waiting move. She didn't want to move the bishop out because that could lose a tempo. And you've got to watch out for c4, by the way. And rook c8, well, it might be that the rook supports the pawn coming here. So c4, well, that was kind of the whole idea of playing a3, so c4 was played. But Ju had prepared knight e3, good move. Yeah, there's a few poor options here. Let's start with knight b6, that wouldn't be good. Because then the bishop comes here, and well, if black is careless, you can lose material pretty badly here. Bishop f3. Or, well, this is fun. Knight e7 is even worse because that allows knight d6 mate. So knight e3 is the move. So getting a little bit tactical. So black gives the knight, but takes the knight on e4. Well, that knight on e4 was quite menacing. And that is a beautiful bishop on this long diagonal. Lei castled, and then bishop e7. So Wenjun wants to castle quickly as well. Bishop f3, yeah, that is a strong piece. So good to exchange it off. And the queen comes to a very good square. So basically here, black is going to have to break down this pawn. If white can establish control with moves like rook d1, queen g3, maybe this bishop can come here, or perhaps f4. If white can hold that pawn on e5, then there could be a very nice kingside attack, perhaps doubling rooks on the d file, and then white can switch to a kingside attack. But the problem is that black is going to break with either d6 or f6. So rook d1 played, feels like a very natural move. And yeah, if queen c7 would be a mistake, because then you can see black is too slow with this. There's all this firepower here covering d6, and that's exactly what white wants. Rook d3, double on the d file, and at some moment switch over to attacking on the king side. Therefore, Ju played f6. Good decision. Good to break out. And Lei played queen g3 here. I think taking on f6 would be the most testing move. And, white's pieces are just a bit more active than black's. There's still a few problems for black to solve here. Now, I know bishop d4 is possible. There's a threat here. But black's pawn structure could be a bit better. You know, white does have a bit of pressure here. Now, it could well be that this will simplify down into a major piece endgame, perhaps a rook and pawn endgame, and it should be a draw. But, you know, white has a little something there. But instead, queen g3 was played. And that allowed pawn takes pawn, queen takes, and bishop f6. Now that's a problem. Problem for white, because this pawn on b2 is hanging. So this forces exchanges. Queen d6, bishop takes b2, bishop takes c5. Doesn't really make much difference if queen takes. This actually would simplify to a draw pretty quickly. Don't forget this one is hanging. So in the game, bishop takes c5 keeps a bit more tension. So obviously this rook is attacked. So rook f7, rook b1. I mean, superficially, it seems like white has a little bit of activity. You know, the queen, the bishop look quite good. Rook is coming on open file. Split rooks. Actually, black is absolutely fine. There's more than one way to play this, but this is a nice way to simplify the position. So white has to take, and then rook f5, a skewer. So regains the bishop. Queen moves, and rook takes c5. So after that flurry of exchanges, we've still got level material. This is a slightly weak pawn. You could say that one is potentially weak, but you know, this one is potentially weak as well. Basically, with major piece endgames, it usually there's a pretty wide drawing margin, basically. So rook b7, yeah, bit of activity, and now the rook comes back. Now, if white exchanges here, then I mean it just fizzles out completely. So rook b1. So Lei keeps things interesting. You know, she has real confidence, even though you know the chances of squeezing from something from this position are quite slim. She is trying, and she manages to put some pressure on Zhu over the next few moves. So she sacks pawn, rook takes c4, because of course, yeah, be careful. That's actually potentially a problem. So back rank threat. So g3. So now this is threatened again. So the rook comes back. And king g2. So white is a pawn down. But it's very hard for black to free the position, actually. Well, I say it's hard. I mean, basically, you can give up a pawn to free the position quite easily. But it's, well, impossible to make anything of this position. It's impossible to make anything of the extra pawn when, you know, these pieces are so well placed. a5, a4. And yes, if black carelessly exchanges, then, well, I mean, this is still okay for black, actually. But, you know, there's potential for things to go wrong. So instead h6, so that gives the king a little escape square. h4, so that you know, starts to squeeze black on the king side. And here Wenjun simply decided to wait. And I find that a slightly surprising decision. It's not bad, but there are more straightforward ways to play. You know, black could break out straight away. For example, it's possible to exchange here and play queen f6, give that pawn on d7 and play rook f8. That's not bad. Another way to break out is rook c2. So again, allow the pawn on d7 to be taken, and then queen f6. So counter-attack. And white really has to play queen f4, but that's not great. Although it looks slightly scary to have the rook here. In fact, this is actually just heads for a draw very quickly. The king is fine, and this one can be taken. And another way to break out is queen f8. Of course, black would like to exchange queens. Black has an extra pawn. It's possible to go into an endgame with 2 rooks against the queen, but it's very hard to imagine that this will be anything but a draw. It's a queen and a pawn against 2 rooks. White has to make sure the king is safe if white is going to squeeze anything in the position, but that's impossible. There are just too many loose elements in this position. You have to keep the rooks coordinated, you have to hang on to the a-pawn, and you have to protect the king. Basically, it's going to end in perpetual check, for example, like this. And, if white is trying to scoop this pawn, then in the meantime, it's going to be perpetual check at the other end of the board. So yeah, I think there were kind of straightforward ways to clear the position here for black. But Wenjun played king h8, and okay, there's some waiting going on here. Rook b2, king h7, h5. I would be a little bit nervous about allowing my king to be squashed in this way. But it's very hard for white to achieve anything. And finally, Lei goes for rook b5. So now she might be doing something. And Wenjun decides, okay, it's time to break out. So queen f6. So she gives the pawn on d7 and then rook f8. So we had a very similar position, one of those earlier variations, except white wasn't quite so well advanced. But black is still fine here, so that's a threat. And, well, white has to be a little bit careful because there could potentially be a check on f3 as well. So that's why f4 was played. That opens the king a little bit. Rook c8, yeah. Now white has to take care. So queen d4. That is prudent, basically forcing a queen exchange. Black can't move the queen too far away because g7 is on. So an exchange of queens. And there are various ways to play this. Ju plays king g8. You could play rook c5 here. Attack that one and then go e5 just to exchange pawns. That's not bad. But king g8 is okay. Rook e4. Now be careful, because if king f7, then rook e5, and that's actually serious. So at this point, black has to activate the rook and go for the a-pawn. So that just pins the rook down. And, well, white has a little bit of initiative on the king side. But there's only one way to make anything of it, and that's to simplify down. Now, if black is careless and plays, say, rook here, then king g6 is pretty serious. So king h7. Of course, this would be a draw even without this pawn. But it makes it even easier. So the pawn goes down the board. G4. Well, A2 is a little perilous actually. If black is careless here, well, the best thing to do is simply give up this pawn. But if black tries to hang on to things, yeah, again, king g6 wouldn't be the brightest idea. So, well, before that stage is reached, so rook a2, so this black can still wait with the rook here. g5, well, it's the only way for white to make progress. An exchange. And here's a very neat move. Yes, it's possible to check, but this is by far the simplest. Forcing white to go for this position with 2 G pawns, and there is no way through. Let's just go through the final moves. Rook check. And if the king advances, then rook f2 check. The king can just be checked away. This is basically Philidor's defense. For those of you, well, I'm sure you know this basic rook and pawn endgame. And the simplest here is just to give up the a pawn, making sure that king g6 can be met by rook b6 check. So that's what happened. King g6 check, and a2. Yeah, black does not need that pawn. And this is Philidor's position. Actually, it's even better than that. So let's just, you can see that this rook controls the 3rd rank, or the 6th rank, depending on which way you're looking at it. If g6, then the whole point is, at this point, the rook goes to the back rank, and now the king has no shelter, so you can just keep checking the king, and it's a draw. With the g pawn, actually, there's another way to draw. You can actually just defend passively. And in this position, black just has to wait with the rook. Yeah, a knight's pawn is a very unfortunate pawn to have. White can make no progress here. It's one of those rare occasions when actually just playing passively is enough to draw the position. White can do absolutely nothing here. It's just a draw. So in this position, Lei Tingjie simply checked a few times, and the players looked into each other's eyes and shook hands, and that's a draw. So there we go. After 9 games, the scores are still level. Just 3 games to go. It's a really tense contest. I mean, this was just another chapter in the book of the match. But, well, we saw again that Lei Tingjie is very well prepared. But Wenjun handled the new situation very well. And by the time it got to this position, well, black has more or less equalised. I mean, maybe Lei Tingjie could have squeezed a little bit more from the position, but, well, after the simplification around here, there really wasn't any difficulty for black at all. So the next game, game 10, takes place tomorrow. I'll be covering it again. I do really enjoy these matches. I think they're absolutely fascinating. We're building up to a grand climax. Stick with the PowerPlayChess channel. If you're not a subscriber, do click on the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.